The second day of the United Nations General Assembly is underway. World leaders rejected Israel's genocidal actions and the unilateral coercive measures in the first day of the general debate. Argentina's Chamber of Deputies debates bill to privatize Aerolíneas Argentinas, an initiative promoted by the government of Javier Milei. And Hurricane Helene is intensifying, growing in size and forecast to hammer Florida's Gulf Coast on Thursday with potentially devastating storm surge, damaging winds and flooding rainfall. Hello and welcome to From the South. I'm Alejandra Garcia from TeleSUR Studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. On the second day of keynote addresses at the United Nations General Assembly, world leaders are proposing solutions to tackle global challenges that threaten peace and sustainable development. On the first day of the United Nations General Assembly, the senior authorities stressed the importance of taking action in the face of the climate crisis. In this regard, the heads of state and government rejected the genocidal actions of Israel and the imposition of unilateral coercive measures. The Latin American governments will play a key role in the second day with this speeches of President of Dominica, Sylvain Burton, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Venezuela, Ivan Gil. Venezuelan Minister of Foreign Affairs Ivan Gil denounced Wednesday at the United Nations NATO's expansionism to South America with the complicity of what he called the lackey governments of Argentina and Ecuador.
Victorious. NATO's expansion also threatens peace in South America with the installation of military bases with the complicity of the lackey governments of Argentina and Ecuador.
In another part of his speech, the Venezuelan top diplomat accused the United States government of promoting and planning destabilization attacks on his country, including assassination attempts against the Bolivarian nation leaders.
The very territory of the United States of America, attacks, assassination attempts, destabilization and attacks against sovereign peoples such as Venezuela are continuously planned. To this end, they have resorted to the use of information and communication technologies, especially social media, controlled by the empire's frontmen who fabricate psychological wars aimed at exploiting feelings of hatred and destruction without control of any sort.
While addressing the United Nations General Assembly, the President of Honduras, Xiomara Castro, denounced the current threats against her country's sovereignty.
Today, I am threatened by the same forces of capital that 15 years ago perpetrated a coup d'etat against President Manuel Zelaya. I called out this new conspiracy in the streets during the huge gatherings of people that took place on the 14th and 15th of September, our country's Independence Day. I'm being threatened because I have brought in structural changes to the economic model, and because I have called out the unfair taxation regime that perpetuates inequalities, that gives to the most powerful and that exploits the poorest.
In this context, the Honduran president also stressed on the role that global capitalism has played in destroying natural resources and exerting oppression in the peoples of Latin America and the Caribbean.
At this assembly, the majority of leaders from Latin America and the Caribbean have called out global capitalism as the main factor responsible for the destruction of natural resources and as the oppressor of the conditions of life of humanity. Accumulation of economic gain prevails above human interest, and the role of international financial bodies with their loans with conditions attached to them and fiscal and financial income are things that only aggravate the situation of poverty and dependency of our countries.
Meanwhile, on his lecture at the United Nations General Assembly, the president of Suriname, Shan Santoki, stressed the need to foster renewable sources energy.
I'm in favor of a just transition to a carbon-less economy for the coming decades, but we also expect to be allowed to develop our natural resources in an environmentally friendly and balanced manner in compliance with the international standards and practices. In fact, we have already embarked in such a development path by introducing more renewables to our energy grid, utilizing technological innovations to reduce our carbon footprint even further.
Let's take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at TeleSUR English, where you'll find news in different formats, news updates, and more. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Argentina's Chamber of Deputies debates bill to privatize Aerolíneas Argentinas, an initiative promoted by the government of Javier Milei. Deputies from opposition parties presented two bills for the state-owned airline to be sold to the private sector. The Transport and Budget Commissions opened the rounds of debates on the sale of the airline. In spite of the workers' rejection, the transport authorities affirmed that the company will compete on equal terms with other companies in the sector. Argentina's airline workers started a mobilization in rejection of the privatization of the airline. Although there is a police deployment, demonstrators began to gather in front of the Congress in protest against the implementation of the measure, which generates concern in the union due to the risk of massive layoffs once the private company has control. This adds to the multiple expressions of rejection to the privatization policies implemented by the current government management since the arrival of Javier Milei to power. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador sent a letter to the parents of the 43 Ayotzinapa teachers who went missing a decade ago to update them about the progress of the investigations. The Mexican president read the content of the letter during his regular morning press conference, where he informed that there had been progress in the investigation and that certain details of the events had been clarified, but he emphasized that not with the speed expected. The Mexican leader also affirmed that the file will not be closed and the investigation will continue until the total clarification of the case.
Ayer envié en efecto una carta a las mamás, los papás.
Yesterday, I actually sent a letter to the mothers and fathers of the young people from Ayotzinapa who disappeared 10 years ago. I made a commitment with them to look for the youngsters until they were found, and we have been working on that all the time. That the investigation has progressed, not as we would like to, but it is not a closed file. The investigation will continue. And several things that were not known have been clarified.
UNICEF warned that armed violence in Haiti is causing displacement of citizens, a school disruption and health crisis despite the support of the Kenyan military to law enforcement. According to the agency, to date, nearly 170,000 displaced have been reported in the city of Port-au-Prince and more than 300,000 in the rest of the country. In addition, the September 11th confrontations between police and armed groups in the capital city forced more than 130,000 children to flee to shelters. According to UNICEF, UNICEF, 156,000 students had to abandon their academic classes after hundreds of schools were closed due to the armed violence. Also, 40% of the health centers in Port-au-Prince have closed due to the violence crisis in the country. Feminist organizations in El Salvador speak out in the framework of the Day of Action for the Decriminalization of Abortion, which is celebrated every September 28th. The demonstrators condemned the impact of the law of absolute criminalization of abortion in the country. They also denounced the case of a 19-year-old girl who was imprisoned under the emergency regime after facing an obstetric emergency in a hospital in the east of the country. The leaders of the organization rejected President Nayib Bukele's speech at the United Nations, where he affirmed that human rights are respected in El Salvador. Venezuela's Minister of Oil, Delcy Rodriguez, assures that the country is an attractive market for foreign investment in the energy sector. This was stated on Tuesday at a meeting held with the board of directors of PDVSA, the state-owned oil company of the Bolivarian nation. The minister, who is also the executive vice president of the country, said that the territory with the largest certified oil reserve in the world attracts investors. She also gave an account of the policy of alliances and cooperation, which includes the gas industry, and the efforts of the workers who have made possible the growth of the sector, which continues to strengthen despite the attempts of the Venezuelan ultra-right wing and its international allies to weaken it. We have a second short break coming up, but before we invite you to visit our YouTube channel at TeleSUR English, there you'll be able to rewatch our interviews, top stories, special broadcastings, and more. Hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell to stay up to date on the world's most recent events. Final short break, don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Hurricane Helene is intensifying, growing in size, and forecast to hammer Florida's Gulf Coast on Thursday with potentially devastating storm surge, damaging winds, and flooding rainfall. The impacts from Helene won't stop at the coast. Life-threatening flash flooding, damage, winds, and some tornadoes will also spread well inland into parts of the southeast. Helene became the fifth hurricane of the 2024 Atlantic hurricane season late Wednesday morning. It is centered just under 500 miles southwest of Tampa, Florida, and is tracking north. Helene's maximum sustained winds are 80 kilometers per hour. The storm is drenching parts of Mexico, Yucatan, and western Cuba. In this context, the U.S. authorities began the evacuation plan in the coastal areas of the state of Florida due to the arrival of Hurricane Helene. This way, the U.S. National Hurricane Center warned that Helene's winds are progressively increasing. In this regard, President Joe Biden declared a state of emergency, with authorities already prepared to address the crisis and support evacuation efforts. According to local media, Helene could change its trajectory, so the southeastern part of the country has also been put under alert for them to take the necessary preventive measures. In Colombia, 9 fires are still active in the southeastern region of the country, and water supplies have decreased as a result of the prolonged drought. The departments affected by the fires are Huila, Tolima, Nariño, and Valle del Cauca, reporting more than 6,000 hectares of forest affected. Meanwhile, 4 aircraft are extinguishing the fires. In addition, the company in charge of the National Interconnected System warned that the aggravated reservoir reached its lowest level in the last 20 years compared to similar periods. Also, among the most affected areas is the capital city, where water rationing measures will be taken starting next Sunday, September 29th. The Lebanese Islamic Resistance Movement, Hezbollah, has carried out a series of attacks against Israeli military targets, including the headquarters of the intelligence agency Mossad in Tel Aviv. On Wednesday morning, the Lebanese resistance group confirmed they hit the complex with a Qadr-1 ballistic missile. Hezbollah explained that the attack against the Israeli office is the response to the planning carried out by the body that resulted in the assassination of several of its commanders. On the other hand, Israel assures that the anti-aircraft defense intercepted the rocket. This is the first time since the escalation of tensions between Lebanon and Israel that the resistance attacks the city of Tel Aviv. The Zionist regime, in turn, attacked residential areas in southern Lebanon minutes later. Sudanese army troops bombed the western airport of the city of Njala, controlled by paramilitary forces. The attack took place after a cargo plane landed on the airport runway, carrying a load of heavy weapons. The information details that the bombing caused damage to the air terminal, the control tower, and central offices, as well as to a barrack of the armed group. The nation is plunged into an internal war as the head of the Sudanese army, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and the leader of the paramilitary forces, Mohamed Hamdan Daglo, seek control of the territory. In Palestine, the number of dead rises after 4 Israeli massacres against families in the Gaza Strip. The health authorities informed that the number of people killed since October 2023 exceeds 41,495, while more than 96,000 were injured. They also detailed that during the last 24 hours, Israel carried out 4 new massacres in which at least 85 civilians were killed and more than 104 injured. In this sense, the authorities ratified the difficulties faced by the emergency teams in providing medical care to the victims and recovering the bodies trapped in the rubble. In the United States, anti-Zionist Jews mobilized in rejection of Washington's support for the genocide in the Gaza Strip. Activists demand a weapon embargo against Israel amid its siege against the people of Palestine and its offensive against the territory of Lebanon. The demonstrators denounced that several pro-Israeli organizations in the United States seek to prevent the government from putting pressure on Israel due to the genocide in Gaza. The protesters denounced that the murder and extermination orchestrated by the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, do not represent the values of the Jewish people and that hundreds of citizens reject these actions.
Recibiendo mensajes extorsivos. Esa no está circulando. Sin embargo, todas las demás, Nueva Estrella, ¿no? Los Anconeros, que además fue el último
Union. On Tuesday, several transport Peruvian unions announced a strike and march for Thursday, September 26th, due to the upward trends of extortions and violent attacks in the country. The head of the National Association for the Integration of Transportation Companies, Martín Valeriano, informed that in view of the crisis, a strike has been called, backed up by a march to the Congress to demand greater security and tangible measures from the government. The rally will include 33 transportation companies from different areas of Lima and Callao. The union leader reported that so far they have suffered 14 attacks due to the lack of security that is seriously affecting them.
Extortionists have attended more to the march than authorities. None of the authorities have shown up. Not even they have supported us somehow for pity or compassion. They have felt nothing. Therefore, we are still here, our colleagues are here, and will continue to move forward until we find ourselves further ahead.
We have come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net and join us on social media, Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok as well. For TeleSUR English, I'm Alejandra Garcia. Thank you for watching.